We have many fans and friends and family, as well as some judges here for James. And so our structure for the day will be the student will present for about 5 minutes on their topic, on what they've researched, which is just a fraction of what's in their paper. So that's why we thank the judges for taking time to read the whole thing through. But it gives our audience a little bit of an idea of the topic. So James will, and each student will present for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have 25 minutes of questions, and this is especially time for the judges who have had a chance to wrestle through the paper and think about those ideas. So especially it's the time for the judges to ask questions, and James and the students will get to defend their ideas. And so James, would you introduce your judges to the audience for us?
Corporal Erickson, one of my judges. He's my pastor at Green Hill Baptist, and Al Manning is my boss at Sub City.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here. Go ahead, James.
All right. In 1788, the Constitution for the United States of America was ratified. It framed a new kind of government that was divided in its powers. The federal government was only allowed specific powers, including the power to tax, regulate interstate and foreign commerce, create a monetary system, and declare war. However, the federal government has stretched their powers through manipulating the Commerce Clause and creating unrepresentative bureaucratic agencies. Some have argued that this kind of federal regulation is good and in fact necessary for the common defense of consumers and workers. They argue that if the federal government does not force all states to share the same regulations, that some states will allow businesses to harm the consumers and abuse the labor force. These assertions are incorrect. Industries in the United States of America should not be regulated by the federal government for 3 reasons. Industries are much better at regulating than governments through natural incentives. State governments have the proper jurisdiction and good incentives to regulate industries correctly, and the federal government must fulfill other responsibilities. To say that the federal government makes bad decisions to some people may seem obvious, but to others it might be alarming. The truth is, the government's decisions concerning industries are more negative more often than the few instances in which they are somewhat positive. One historically prominent catastrophe caused by federal intervention is price controls. Usually price controls have to be enacted by the national or federal level of government in order to be enforceable, since otherwise citizens can simply travel to a different jurisdiction to find market-driven prices. The discussion of price controls must be prefaced by the discussion of incentives that drive market prices and the incentives that drive governments to attempt at regulating those market prices. Through supply and demand, industries are forced to make the price of their product match the value that it provides while remaining economically feasible. Unfortunately, many greedy businesses and consumers demand price controls from the government that are historically and necessarily damaging to the economy. Price controls, if they have any effect, lead to shortages, garbage products, and national collapse, instead of the promised relief for families, continuation of businesses, and improved commodities. A similar logic applies to any resource that an industry may use. Raw materials, fuel, natural resources, man-hours, patents, and the government may attempt to regulate as they are shared in an environment of supply and demand. Many of the disadvantages of federal regulation are not present with state regulation. One disadvantage of federal regulation is that it does not allow for competitive regulations. When the federal government makes a decision, the entire nation has to suffer the consequences or reap the benefits. State regulations can be more demonstrably effective since they can be compared to other states. States can pass legislation quicker than the federal government because legislation only needs to be convincing to that one state government. Also, the state's regulations can be more specific to what the state considers the local problem that they are trying to fix. Another reason the federal government should not regulate industries is that they have large areas of authority and responsibility within their jurisdiction that they are governing poorly or have completely abandoned. The federal government does still tax its citizens and regulate interstate as well as intrastate commerce. However, the federal government has not been able to effectively regulate the import of fentanyl into the United States, even though they have made laws concerning it. The federal government has completely abandoned the production of the currency of the United States by outsourcing it to the Federal Reserve, which is hardly representative. The declaration of war has become even more unrepresentative. The last time the United States constitutionally declared war was during the Second World War. Since then, the United States has been heavily involved in 5 wars. wars: the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Desert Shield or Desert Storm, the global war on terror, and the United States is also beginning its pre-war display of support for the Ukraine border dispute. None of these foreign interventions that match the force of nations engaged in war were declared by Congress. The federal government should fulfill its constitutional duties as they impact all of the states and their representation on the world stage. Industries in the United States of America should not be regulated by the federal government for 3 reasons. Industries are much better at regulating than governments through natural incentives. State governments have the proper jurisdiction and good incentives to regulate industries correctly, and the federal government must fulfill other responsibilities. This should matter to citizens of any nation that is attempting to regulate industry. The centralized planning of fallible governments is the death of any living economy.